Now, the kidnapping of 4 Moti brothers in Limpopo in October last year shocked the country as Zidan, Zayyad, Alaan and Zia Moti, aged between 6 and 15, were kidnapped by gunmen on their way to school. Shortly after they were reunited with their family, police said investigations into that kidnapping will continue. For more of this, we're joined by Barry Bateman, who's ENC's senior reporter in studio, and then we'll be giving you more details as well on that. Barry, let's start with you. Just furnish us with some of the details on the developments around this particular case.
Well, let's just cast our minds back to October when we got that news that these 4 young boys had been taken in one go by gunmen in Polokwane. You know, it grabbed headlines, it tugged on South Africa's hearts, outpouring of support. Everyone was behind the family. There were prayer groups and so on. 3 weeks later, we have this incredibly relief that the 4 boys had been released. What we're learning now is that on that night that they were released, the police had picked them up, taken them to a medical facility or somewhere where a doctor could assess them, and they could have a look to make sure that they are healthy. What we know is that the father then arrived with an interdict and prohibited the police from speaking to these children or having any contact with any members of the family. So that has effectively put a spanner in the works and brought this investigation to a halt.
Yeah, and we've also got Mike Bolhes, who's a specialist investigator, joining us for this particular discussion, Barry. And maybe let's just get his thoughts on the latest developments, the action that was taken by the family, Mike, and their decision to then whisk their children or the entire family away to Dubai, really putting a big spanner in the works when it comes to finalizing this investigation and getting some arrests out there.
Yeah, this is what I've predicted all along. I've said it in previous interviews. I would suspect that the parents would do everything in their power not to involve the kids, which is understandable. However, there are routes that needs to be followed, and if it's not taken, then it escalates kidnapping. Crime begets crime. So I do hold them responsible, and I hope if they're watching this interview that they would reconsider and identify policemen that they trust, or otherwise even work through private investigators of their choice or lawyers. But they need to assist the authorities. Not every policeman is corrupt. We know there is corruption in the police, but this specific case has touched the heart, as Barry has clearly explained, the whole nation. So the whole nation wants, if we can call it revenge, they want justice. They want these people caught. And since this case is worldwide known, it is important to catch these criminals. And the only way to catch them is to interview the children. It can be done very professionally and in a very sensitive way. There is ways and means to get as much information as possible in order to identify them and catch them.
Morning, Mike. Barry here. You were talking about the different ways or the sensitive ways in which the children could be interviewed. In that application, as we understand it, the father cited that the children would be traumatized and being questioned by the police could compound that trauma, which is, I think, a perfectly reasonable explanation given, I mean, you've worked very closely with cases of this nature. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? How would an investigation go about from the police's side in doing that sensitive, obtaining a statement from children?
Look, you have to first, a specialist investigator into serious violent crime, specifically dealing with kidnappings, specifically dealing with trauma, highly qualified, needs to win the confidence of the kids with the family together. All starts with the complete family together, and then you circle it in where you eventually just deal per child or with all 4 of them. You have to be very careful to also make sure that the kids, because they most probably, and the family, has been threatened severely and said that if you do deal with the authorities, we'll come again. We must understand where we find ourselves in South Africa. Unfortunately, and I say it with a brokenness of my heart, the authorities do not protect and serve as they should. So the people, unfortunately, do not trust the authorities. But as I've said, you need to identify, you need to do something about this in order to stop this heinous kinds of crimes that are happening and escalating in South Africa. So once you've won the kids over, you need to get the maximum information as possible. Otherwise, you leave everybody out there, including the authorities, that there may have been ulterior motives. Was this staged kidnapping? Was this all planned in order to leave the country and take out a great sum of money? Look, I've done quite a few kidnappings, and some of them have been staged with money laundering involved in order to take huge amounts of money out of the country and then families leaving as well. So I'm not saying, and it's very important that the public listen to me, I'm not saying this is the situation, but people are going to make a deduction, unfortunately, and we know how social media is. It is the future. Everything is being discussed. And whole of South Africa has been behind, supporting, praying, as you've said, Barry, in order to see these kids coming back safely. They are back, and now it is my opinion that everything in our power, the authorities' power and our nation's power, is to have these criminals caught. And the only way to do that is if the family would consider what I've said. They need to give their full support, and they need to do it very quickly.
You raise a very important point there, Mike, around some of these kidnappings being staged and a lot of the complexities that are associated with kidnappings. That just makes me think, it makes the job of officials or law enforcement officials that much more difficult when it comes to cracking cases of this nature.
Yes. Taking in consideration that the police is going out of their way for this specific case, we must compliment them, and we must be thankful, and we must support them. You cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not all policemen are corrupt. There are policemen who wants to assist, protect, and serve and make a difference, and this has a very serious effect on them. So, yes, the police here needs to be identified. The specialist investigators needs to be identified in order to do a thorough investigation. Otherwise, the deduction would be that the family has done something or is involved in something that they shouldn't have done or be. In other words, then a further investigation, as the Chief of Police has said, Becky Tsele, there will be a line drawn. There will be a further investigation done if there has been any crime committed by the family, and were they in cahoots, and if this was staged, and if there was any money laundering. And that investigation in itself will obviously be a shock to everybody else, because that's the last thing that we want to hear or even think. So once again, family, you need to step up, you need to assist, and obviously there are other people and other ways and means that you can be assisted in order to catch these criminals.
Yeah, and Barry, that means it's been very difficult for you in some instances to piece together the details of this particular incident because of the different speculation that is now coming about based on the actions that have been taken by the family.
Yeah, well, first off, I think we must just be clear that whenever there is a case like this here, it is very sensitive. From that day that the children were snatched, everything that the police are doing is with the prime goal of not causing any harm to the children. So everything is very secretive in and of itself. So getting information out at that early stage is always going to be difficult. But you're right, there was a lot of speculation. But also with that, a lot of people coming out and, praying for these children, expressing sympathy with the family. And with that comes the conspiracy theories. But in the absence of any evidence to suggest that there was malfeasance involved here, I think we must be mindful to tread in that direction. So you're right, what we have at this stage, and I think Mike is spot on there. I've gone to the family and I've asked them, I've put the information that I have available to me. This is what we understand has taken place. Why did you adopt this route? Unfortunately, they have adopted not to offer an explanation or anything to that effect. So in the absence of an explanation, and particularly on social media, you're going to see this wild speculation. So I think it is in the interests of the family. Just play open cards. I mean, the media, the public, everyone was there for them on the day those children went missing. Do not turn your back on us now.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think broadly, if we could just take it a little bit broader, and I'll start with you, Barry, this anti-kidnapping task team that's been now established. Just talk us through the details of that and really how it'll contribute to reducing the scourge of kidnappings. We mentioned earlier that they increased by about 60%. This is according to a crime intelligence report that was released late last year. So talk us through that, and then obviously we'll get some insights from you as well, Mike.
So what we have is just recently the establishment of this anti-kidnapping task team, and it came round about the same time as the Moti boys were taken. It was essentially in response to that. Prior to that, we had something silly like 5 members of crime intelligence which were assigned to dealing with kidnapping cases, which is a ludicrously under-resourced section for a crime that has grown so significantly over the last decade. So what we have now is this new unit. It is led by Major General Feroz Khan, so probably the second most senior person within crime intelligence. He's leading this. There has been a drive, or an instruction given from the National Commissioner's Office to all the generals within the provinces to recruit members who would be interested in joining. So there's a gathering of various skills within the organization and additional skills, just people to man this particular team. In every province, there will be task teams specifically dealing with kidnapping. Gauteng, no doubt, will get the lion's share of those resources because this is where most of these kidnappings take place. But nevertheless, what we can draw from this is that the police have recognized that this is a problem. And they have responded to that by putting resources into it. And that must be welcomed.
No, absolutely, Mike. And I'm sure you would agree in terms of those resources being pumped into this task team so that we can actually face this battle in the best way that we know how.
Yes, you know, visible policing. I'm here in Plet and I've seen the difference. The police was everywhere, all over the place. The traffic flowed. Everything went well over the December holidays. There's no kidnappings here. There's no funny stuff. I think an aeroplane landed. That was the biggest thing that happened here. But if you have visible policing in itself, like Barry has explained, there is a anti-kidnapping unit that comes from the highest ranks, and it's given the instructions as to do whatever they can to identify kidnappings, resolve kidnappings and prevent kidnappings. Those are the 3 things that policemen, when they protect and serve, is supposed to do. Then they need the support of the public. In other words, any kidnapping must be reported. Because remember, that 60%, I say, is 70. There's at least 10 to 20% of kidnappings that's never reported. People just pay, especially in the lower level, not the high figures. And then we must understand that crime begets crime. If this kidnapping that is so spoken of the 4 boys, just gets swept under the carpet, what do you think the syndicates, and remember these syndicates are transatlantic, these syndicates, as I've explained before, left no evidence behind, nothing. It was the perfect crime. The only evidence that we can ever get is via the 4 children. That's it. And I mean, DNA should have been taken. A lot of information should have been taken once the kids were returned. I'm not sure if that was done or not, but that is going to be play a significant role. The forensic information, the moment the kids were dropped, they should, or fetched, everything pertaining them should have been taken in by the police in a crime kit, and then after they've been consoled and they're ready, they should be interviewed, and that information can lead, with the technology of today, identifying these kidnappers, and have they been doing kidnappings in South Africa in other cases as well. So I compliment the police, and they have our full support. I also want to say there is private investigators out there like ourselves, that our main aim is to identify crime, to solve crime and prevent crime. And those who wants to work with us through the police, or with the police with us, we need to work together as South Africans in authority to prevent these crimes. Otherwise, we will never solve it, and crime will beget crime. In other words, this kind of crime will show that it pays, the criminal can do it and can get away with it.
No, absolutely. Mike, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But Barry, maybe when we have another conversation, how do parents navigate a kidnapping situation? I think that's going to be very important. We've spoken about how the family of the little girl that was kidnapped and returned home, her family had paid a ransom before, I think, they had engaged police. So I think that's going to be something interesting to unpack as you continue to to develop the story. Just how do we navigate a kidnapping situation should it arise, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Barry Bateman there. And of course, Mike Bolhuis from Plettenberg Bay joining us to talk about the developments around the Moti brothers and of course the decisions that the family has taken to protect their boys after they were kidnapped last year, you'll remember.